All right, our first question comes from Matthew Palmieri, who lives in Long Island, New York, Long Island. Do you feel it's about time for the Russian forces to escalate and declare outright war in Ukraine to save face? Or do you feel it is not yet time for such an escalation?
Well, first of all, I don't feel that anybody should declare war to save face. So I disagree with that proposition. You declare war to defend national security interests. You declare war when you've been attacked. There's things. This isn't war. This is a special military operation. That special military operation comes with various legal qualifiers, what Russia can and what Russia cannot do. Contrary to the popular belief here in the United States, Vladimir Putin is not a dictator. Vladimir Putin is responsible for the Constitution of Russia. He's responsible for the constitutional duties that he has, and he has to be respectful of the duties and responsibilities of other constitutional bodies, such as the parliament. And the law says what he can and what he can't do. Vladimir Putin has followed the law assiduously in this. He's done everything correct. He's dotted all the I's. He's crossed all the T's. And he has come up with a construct called the Special Military Operation that gives him the legal authority to carry out limited military actions inside.
I'm up there with Mark Twain now. This is going to be a famous quote. You watch.
Yeah, so you're going to make a T-shirt of it next. But anyways, the special military operation is just that, a special military operation, and it one of the key aspects of the special military operation is the foundational principle that you shall do no harm to the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. So anybody who says it's time to take off the gloves and declare war, first of all, what legal authority does Putin have to do this? Somebody needs to articulate that. What legal authority does Putin have to do this? And the other thing is, how does declaring war improve Russia's situation? Because if you're singularly focused on the battlefield, it means you have no clue about what's going on in the world today. That this is far much bigger. I think my English was correct in that. This is a far bigger issue than simply killing Ukrainians on the battlefield. This is an issue about global transformation away from an American singularity to a multilateral, power sharing. And Russia is at the lead in leading this transformation. This transformation has been accelerated by the reckless policies of sanctions that the United States, Europe, and others have imposed on Russia. They have committed suicide, economic suicide. They tried to do harm to the Russian nation by limiting Russia's exports of their energy and other, basically a total sanctioning of Russia. And it's backfired. Russia actually happens to know the global economy better than the Americans and the British and the French and the Germans and everybody else who signed up to this. And I think when we look at the strategic posturing of Russia, the thing that Putin, take a look at today. He was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, meeting with President Xi of China, meeting with Modi of India, meeting with other people, bringing Iran into the fold, basically implementing this process. And that process also involves working with the so-called BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now it's been expanded to include Argentina. Turkey wants to join. Egypt wants to join. Saudi Arabia wants to. Everybody wants to join BRICS. Nobody wants to join the G7. So the point I'm trying to get at is, if you declare war, it means general mobilization. That means you take this successful economic transition that Russia's undergoing right now, where they have divorced themselves, not because they initiated the divorce, but because the West divorced Russia, and Russia's now pivoting to the East, trying to successfully integrate in a meaningful fashion so their economy doesn't skip a beat. He's reconfigured the ruble. Remember, the ruble will be rubble, according to Biden. No, the ruble's doing quite well. He's done all this, and it's empowering Russia to successfully fulfill the strategic objective of challenging American unilateral hegemony. have this general mobilization, the Russian economy will suffer. Everybody's like, wait a minute, economies always do better in wartime. No, they don't. Companies might make money, defense industries might make money, but the economy doesn't do better. The economy is disrupted tremendously. There's inflationary pressures put on the currency, etc. Russia doesn't want inflationary pressure. Russia wants stability. So Russia's not going to generally mobilize. So any concept of we have to save face, generally mobilize, so we can kick the crap out of the Ukrainians and feel good about ourselves. No responsible leader would ever frame a policy decision of that magnitude in that manner. So I don't agree with the notion that they need to take the gloves off. What they need to do is allocate more resources to the special military operation. I think it's clear now that NATO has become decisively involved, as I said they would. You put up the quote. The army that's in Ukraine today is a NATO army. It's not a Ukrainian army. Let's stop playing games. It's a NATO army. It just happens to be manned by a lot of Ukrainians, but it's controlled by NATO. It's equipped by NATO. NATO did the planning. NATO oversees the intelligence. That's the bottom line. So this changed the game, and Russia's going to have to increase the resources allocated to it, or it's going to find itself engaged in a long-term stalemate. And in that case, Russia loses by not winning. In order for Russia to win, Russia has to win on all fronts. It has to accomplish everything it stated it's going to accomplish. Not just the liberation of the Donbass, but demilitarization, denazification. Demilitarization is linked to the notion of removing all traces of NATO from Ukraine. Well, if it's now a NATO army, that means demilitarization means removing the entire army. You can't do that with 200,000. So there we go.
You mentioned denazification. I should also point out to folks that one of your 2-minute topic videos was pretty much about clarifying what it means to denazify. So you can also see that at scottritterextra.com. Our next question is from Walter Marques from Portugal. It looks like NATO and the U.S. are on the brink of larger war fronts in Ukraine, Kosovo, Taiwan, Syria, and now Armenia. Can we see a world war arising between East and West?
I mean, that's always a risk anytime you have this kind of this conflict. But no, if you break each one of those down into their independent components, they have different historical roots. They have different objectives. There's not a singularity there linking them other than violence. And I don't see them coalescing into a global conflict at this time. A world war breaks out when the United States squares off against either Russia directly or China directly, and not this peripheral stuff.
Well, speaking of which, while you were doing your last-minute research at the top of the podcast, I showed some video in which Russia was saying if it would be crossing a red line if the U.S. provides longer-range missiles.
Long-range missiles,
yeah. What's the story on that briefly?
The long-range missile they're talking about is the ATACMS. The United States has provided a system called HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, and that system, I forget the size of it. I'm tired, but it's a very accurate system. It's a very deadly system. The Ukrainians are using it to good effect, but it doesn't give them long-range strike capabilities that can reach deep into Russia and hit command and control, hit strategic, economic targets and things of that nature. The system can be configured, especially I think it's the M270. It's the tracked variant. The truck variant can't be, but the tracked variant can be configured to remove one of the 12 rocket pods and replace it with a large pod with a single missile called the ATACMS. The ATACMS is a 300-kilometer range missile, highly accurate, and it would give Ukraine the ability to do the kind of strikes that Russia has said is a literal red line. Ukraine is demanding that the United States provide this, but we have to go back. In December of last year, Russia provided the United States and NATO with 2 draft treaties, which spelled out their conditions or their desires for a new European security framework. And the U.S. and NATO ignored that. But Joe Biden did call Putin, and in their discussion, it became clear that Putin said one of our red lines is the United States or NATO installing long-range strike capability on Ukrainian soil, because that would now advance it right up to the border with Russia, and that's unacceptable. It won't be allowed. And Biden said, "I give you my word, that will never happen." And Russia is continually reminding the United States that that word was given, and that if it does happen, and Russia has said this, if you provide that, you become a direct party to the conflict. And that means that Russia will now undertake whatever military action necessary to prevent attackers from reaching the front. And I will tell you with virtual absolute certainty that this would include taking out Ramstein Air Base in Germany. It would include taking out a number of warehouse facilities in Poland. It could include taking other places out. In extreme circumstances, it could take out Brussels, the NATO headquarters. So Russia's not messing around. And I think they're very clear on this. And one of the reasons why we know they're clear on it is because the United States says we're not providing ATACMS to Ukraine. So, this is Zelensky throwing another one of his hissy fits on the ground, crying, screaming, thumping his hands, thumping his legs, but he's not going to get that missile system.
Okay. Oh, it looks like we have a voicemail message coming in. This comes from Christian Cars in Belgrade.
Dear Scott, Jeff, and Tori, thank you for your fantastic podcast. This is Christian in Serbia. My question is not pleasant at all, but I need to ask it. Very frequently, when I refer to as an authority, your critics respond that you are a convicted sex offender, serving time from March 2012 to September 2014. How do you suggest that I answer questions about your credibility? How should we answer your critics? What have you learned from your conviction? What does Marina say about this? And Scott, I am a big fan. If you come to Belgrade, I'll treat you for a fantastic, you and Marina, for a fantastic lab dinner. Thank you. I hope to see you soon.
Well, thank you for the question. All right.
That's a mixed bag.
I don't mean to smile, but what I'll say is this: if I'm talking about Ukraine and somebody wants to know about something else, if they want to know about my conviction, if they want to know about my golf handicap, if they want to know about whether or not I can sink a hook shot from mid-court, and the reason why I'm bringing up these disparate things is they don't matter. They have nothing to do with the analysis I'm doing about Ukraine. So the second someone does that, it tells you that they aren't interested in the analysis. They're doing an ad hominem attack in an effort to shift over and create discomfort, get people to pull away. I'm used to it. What can I say about, I think you put out the dates of March to September. First thing I would say is get your facts right. I'm not picking on you, Christian. I'm just saying, I was actually imprisoned from October 2011 until September. So right off the bat, you don't know anything about what you're talking about. You're Googling. That's very bad to do, by the way. Don't Google. But don't read Wikipedia. None of it's right. And I don't mean to be too disparaging. Let me put it this way. I committed no crime. Flat out statement. So now you want to talk about what I was accused of? I'll just say straight up, it's none of your effing business. None of your business. I didn't commit a crime. Do I pry into your personal life? I was charged with events that had no basis of criminality. This was purely you have to talk to the people that did it about the motivations. I know the motivations of some, it's clear. But the fact of the matter is I committed no crime. They had to manufacture a crime. Literally, I have the documentation that they submitted to the court that proves it. The prosecutor saying we can't convict based upon this because it's insufficient to prove a crime because we can't prove that a crime was committed. What we need to do is manufacture a case, pull in things and fundamentally do something. And we said, you can't do that. And the judge went, no, we'll let them do that. The judge literally allowed them to manufacture a crime. And then we were prohibited from defending ourselves, exculpatory. I'll give you an example. I don't go into too much detail here, but it's a computer-based crime, right? I mean, that's what I was alleged of, computer-based crime. Why then, when I tried to turn over my computer to the prosecutor to say, here it is, where's the crime? The prosecutor went, oh, we don't want to touch the computer. No. So then we turned the computer, spent a lot of money, turning it over to forensic investigators, and they went through it and they said, there ain't nothing here. So Then we took it to a guy who spent 28 years. He was one of the leaders in the task force against crimes against children. This is the guy that convicts all the bad people. And we said, we want you to go through the computer. And he wrote back and he said, and I've got the letters. I mean, one of these days I'll write a book and it'll all become clear, but I'm not doing that right now because I'm busy talking about Ukraine. But he said, we don't do this. And we said, why don't you do this? And he said, because everybody says they didn't do anything. And then you give us the computer and we find that they did something. And so we're advising you not to do this, because once we go through your computer, you're going to have to turn it over to the prosecutor and they're going to nail your ass to the wall. And my lawyer's like, well, Scott, we better not do that. I said, give him the goddamn computer. And he did. The guy came back with a letter. He said, in my entire career, I have never written a letter like this, where somebody gave me a computer, said they didn't do it, and I went through it and found out they didn't do it. And he listed all the things. He said, no, he wrote a big letter. So we were going to bring him in as an expert witness. And the prosecution said, no, Judge, you can't allow this to happen. And the judge went, you're right. We're not going to allow the witness. We're not going to allow his statement. We're not going to allow his investigation. Wow. It's a computer crime, but you can't bring in the guy that invested the computer. The prosecution wouldn't. Instead, the prosecution reached out and pulled a sealed file. Sealed. They got it unsealed illegally. They submitted false testimonies, including the document that said, we can't prosecute him unless you unseal this file in New York related to a 2001 incident, which was not found to be criminal. They sealed it for a reason. But you can't unseal it, but they got him to unseal it. We challenged that. The judge said, if you don't want me to allow this evidence in, you're going to have to go to the New York court system and have the New York court system judge whether or not it was sealed or unsealed illegally. We did so. Unanimous decision by the New York Supreme Court said it was done illegally. This stuff should never be allowed into trial. The judge said, screw it, we're allowed in trial anyways. And but it's not it. What they allowed in the trial was only part of the total record. I'll provide a hint that the public's not aware of. I spoke at the detective that arrested me. He did a forensic computer thing on my computers. They came and seized my computers, and he came back and wrote about it. And he said, we found nothing on the computers, nothing. That's why I wasn't prosecuted. They said, there's nothing on the computers. There's no evidence of crime here at all. That report disappeared, by the way. When they turned over my file to Pennsylvania, that report disappeared. You don't know where it happened. No one knows what happened to that report. But there was a whole bunch of other stuff in there too that disappeared, wasn't there. They said they turned over the total file. They did not. They turned over hand-picked things, which taken out of context seemed to imply guilt. Imply guilt of what? I was never charged with a crime in New York. The case was dismissed. The file was sealed. That's what you do in cases like this. You seal the file, never to be released. But instead, Pennsylvania got it released, cherry-picked it, brought it into the trial, and they manufactured a case, and I was convicted. I've been appealing it ever since. They told me, I remember going to the pretrial hours where I'm supposed to be grilled by my lawyers about what's going to happen at the trial, and instead they sat there and they said, Scott, you need to plead guilty. They're going to put 40 years out there. You're going to go to jail for 40 years. I said, I will never plead guilty. They said, 40 years. If you plead guilty to this one charge, they'll give you all parole. You'll never go to prison. I said, innocent men don't plead guilty, especially to the charges that are put out there. I won't do it. We're going to trial. And we did. And they lost. It's a different issue. But I've been appealing it ever since. When I went to prison, tell you what, here's a chance for all you studs out there. You want to see how manly you are? Go to prison on a sex offender charge. Try it. I dare you. You know what they do to sex offenders in prison? They fuck them up. You know what they didn't do to me? Fuck me up. Want to know why? Because the first thing sex offender does in prison is hide. They run away. They tell them, don't talk about your case. Don't do anything. I came into prison and said, read the fucking paperwork. And they all read it and they went, why are you here? I said, that's a good question. The guards even said it. Why the fuck are you here? The warden, why the fuck are you here? None of them could explain it, but I had to be there because I was convicted in a court in a sham trial. You know who picks on sex offender the most? Gangs, Latin Kings, Crips, Bloods. They don't like sex offenders. When you go out into the yard, the gangs own the yard. So what did I do? Went straight up to them. I went and played basketball. You played a game. Wow, really? Go play basketball in the fucking prison, dude. Try it. Try and walk on the basketball court. White dude. Walk on a basketball court dominated by Crips and Bloods. It's blood in, blood out, bitch. You go in there and you have to fight your way on the court. You're fighting the entire game, elbows to the face, knees to the groin. They're biting, they're kicking, and they're testing you. They're seeing what kind of man you are. And if you take it and you give it back to them, then you're allowed on the basketball court. That's the way it works. I did that. I won the respect, the Bloods, Crips, the Latin Kings. And then the other thing that happened is because I won their respect, they turned around and they helped a couple of them out with some cases. They'd come to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? I got 3 sentences reduced. I got a couple sentences thrown out. I got some new trials on people. By the time I left prison, there was the warden and the administrator of the block I was on had given a pass. People come to my cell to get legal advice, and there'd be a line of people lining up. And the guards were like, what the fuck is going on? We don't understand this. But so there was that. So again, sex offenders don't get treated like that in prison. I was treated like that. And then the last thing is you can't be paroled. I was given a 5.5-year sentence. I was told by my lawyers that if you don't plead guilty to the crime, you're going to spend all 5.5 years in prison. I was paroled at 3 years. How did that happen, you say? I didn't plead guilty. I didn't plead. What I did is when I had to take this specific sex offender treatment course, they said, you have to plead guilty to your sex crimes. I said, I committed no sex crime. They said, well, then you'll never graduate. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I brought my entire file in. I threw it on the table. I said, I plead guilty to everything that's in this file. Everything in there, I did. I did it all. None of it's a crime. None of it's a crime. And they sat there and they picked it apart and they couldn't come up with a fucking crime. This is the guy that's responsible for curing me. And he went, there's no crime. Then he went to the warden. He said, we have to graduate him. He did everything we asked him to do. They said, but did he plead guilty? He said, he's not guilty of anything. He admitted to everything and none of it's a crime. And I went to the parole board, told them the same thing. They recommended me for parole. You should have seen, I've got the letters, I've got the paperwork. They're writing, they're saying, how the fuck are we paroling this guy? He didn't plead guilty. Why are we letting him go? Why is the warden doing this? He did it because I'm not fucking guilty. So, hey, Christian, there's my short answer for you, buddy. You want to talk about that? I just gave you some ammunition. Talk about it. But do me a favor. If somebody brings it up, tell them to fuck off. Tell them Ritter's talking about Ukraine. Let's talk about Ukraine. If you want to talk about something else, that's your sick problem. And to everybody else out there, you want to call me a pedophile? Call it to my face. You won't fucking walk away. Blood in, blood out, bitch. But no, we're not playing that game. You're a keyboard warrior. You want to sit there and type words and chuckle and giggle and all that shit? Fuck off. I apologize, Jeff, but it's just, there it is. I laid it out there. Someday I'll write the book about it. It's a travesty of justice. I've been appealing this nonstop. There's still an appeal in Pennsylvania. If we want to talk about the court process and how that is, we can do that at another time too. But bottom line is, if we're talking about Ukraine, let's talk about Ukraine. And let's not talk about anything else.
Well, as you said, there's a book or a movie or something in all this at some point in the future, but not right now. I'll move on to the next question. Masoud Roya from Germany. Thousands of foreign mercenaries are fighting for Ukraine. Why doesn't Russia do the same and hire mercenaries from all over the world?
Because Russia doesn't need to. Russia's Russia. Russia's a real nation. Russia doesn't need to go people to do their fighting for them. Russia has an army. It's a professional army. They have some conscripts, but by and large, it's a professional army. Russia has an organization called Wagner. It's a unique contract relationship with the Russian government, but the people in Wagner are Russians. They have volunteer units from Russia. They don't need to go out and get a foreign legion and all that stuff. Russia fights for Russia. Russia defends Russia. They don't do mercenaries.
Okay. Lately, I've been seeing people paying attention to this whole mercenary issue as if it's novel. But I think mercenaries show up in pretty much every war, unless the point is there's a different type of mercenary or more than usual in this conflict. That's a question, by the way, even though I didn't ask.
No, I got it. I heard your inflection go up, so I'm taking it as a question. Look, the Ukrainian government decided they're going to create this international legion as a way of generating international support, to create a vehicle for propaganda purposes so they could show the world, look, everybody's rushing to fight for us, like the Abraham Lincoln and the Spanish Civil War and all that kind of stuff. But the original International Legion was a joke. It was full of Malcolm Nance types wannabes, fat former non-combat people who pose airsoft style. You're going to hit a button. I knew you were going to do it.
I'm too predictable.
The second you lose eye contact and you shift over, I know you're going for a button. So, but
I wish I had a way where I didn't have to turn my head at all to find it.
You're signaling it. But
yeah.
No, the fact is, the International Legion was a joke. They sent them to the front lines. They performed poorly, and the Ukrainians determined that these guys were more trouble than they're worth, and they pretty much disbanded it. They kept a couple units, small units, going and do specialized things. But suddenly the mercenaries are back, and they're in heavy combat, and these guys know what they're doing. And what happened is the adults took over. And what I mean by that is the CIA, Joint Special Operations, British SAS, French commandos, they came in and they tapped into their global database of people they've been training over the years. In America, we call it foreign internal defense. It's a special forces type mission. You go in and you provide training to units in Africa and South America, Central America, Asia, et cetera. They've got these databases. And they've tapped into it. I think what you're seeing right here is pretty much the equivalent of a CIA army. But it's other intelligence services as well. But they've got it, and they've created a contractual vehicle funded by the U.S. government. They give it to the Ukrainians, so they call it territorial defense. So it's hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars money under territorial defense, and they pay the salaries of these contract international fighters who are trained. They don't roll in one or two. These guys are brought in as a unit. They train as a unit. They function as a unit, and they're very professional. If you see the videos, there's a lot of these guys wearing Ukrainian uniforms. They speak with thick Midwestern American accents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. So, and that's what's happening. These guys are playing a major role. They were sort of the stormtroopers in this fight. They were carrying out SAS-style deep raids into the Russian rear once they broke through. And it's part of this transformational process. Prior to September, the International Legion was a joke. After September, the International Legion is a very professional combat unit because NATO took over, trained them, and they're using it that way. Bad news for them, they're all going to die. Russians are either going to kill them in combat because as good as they are, they're not as good as the Russians. And if they're captured, they're going to be tried and executed. So enjoy your paycheck, enjoy your moment, send all your little selfies home to mom, sis, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever you got. Send them now, because the next picture they're going to see of you isn't going to be quite so pretty. You're either going to be a scared dude in a prison.
Stand by. 3, right. Cruise missile, caliber. Good. Stand by.
30-second interval.
I did that one without turning my head. All right. And by the way, as far as marinas don't say anything about anybody if you can't say anything nice rule, can we suspend that rule for just Malcolm Nance?
Well, I got to be careful because Malcolm Nance did a new video. I don't know if he saw it.
No.
He's on the front line, and there's a artillery piece in the background. Yeah, wait for it. Boom! Artillery. Yeah, steel's coming down, bitches, or something like. I don't know what he said, but and when I saw that, I could only think bad things. But I don't wish harm on Malcolm Nance. I really don't. I don't like Malcolm Nance. I don't respect Malcolm Nance. But this is a man who's allowed his ego to get him involved in a place that he may die. And Malcolm Nance, come home and come on the show. Let's talk about it.
Did come home. I thought he did come home.
He did, but then he went back. Then he sent another big thing saying, I came back, but I have to go back. I have to lead the front. I have to, whatever. So Malcolm, come home.
All right.
Are we in an air raid?
Belly of Ed Powers. How's that for a handle?
That's a good one. Istanbul, Turkey.
Yeah. What do you think about the possible NATO presidential candidacy of Christine Friedland, who, together with Nina Jankowicz, was personally involved in preparing the Ukraine kill list?
Well, first of all, I can't I can't, say that last statement is accurate. I don't know. He says personally involved. If there's evidence out there that shows that, I'd like to see it. Christine Freeland is somebody who endorses an ideology I despise. She's very sympathetic to the Bandera movement, and this would be just I guess it's what NATO deserves. Let's put a Nazi in charge of NATO. Yay. Wouldn't be the first time, but we've had Nazis in charge of the United Nations, so why don't we have Nazis in charge of NATO? So yeah, but NATO is an organization that is transitioning past irrelevance into through the incompetence phase, and then we'll come up to the total disillusion phase. It's finished as an organization. As we speak here today, NATO member called Turkey is threatening to go to war with a NATO member called Greece. A NATO member called France is saying they will side with Greece if the NATO member Turkey fights NATO member Greece. That would be NATO fighting each other. Wonderful. The other thing that's happened is NATO member Poland is saying that NATO member Germany owes them lots of reparations from World War II. NATO member Germany has told NATO member Poland, if you want to play the let's remember history game, why don't we forget the goddamn line on the map and we'll just take Silesia back? That means war. So NATO is falling apart. And I can go on and on about how dysfunctional this pathetic organization is. So maybe it's a good thing they handed over to a Nazi. I mean, she's got discipline. They're very good at organizing mass death concentration camps. So let's let a Nazi take care of NATO. It would just be fitting that the last Secretary General of NATO would be a Nazi.
All right. James Menman Takpa from somewhere in Liberia. Can you say the name of that city or town?
I cannot. Saniquelli. Right. I assume it has some. Well, Liberia has an American root, so I have to put an American spin on this. Saniquelli.
All right.
That's the way American would say it.
I won't dispute that. What has been the most adverse military errors by the Russian army? What should they have done to avoid the errors?
It's not me to say, because when you say military error, it's got to be connected to, first of all, let's just back off and talk about, first principles. War is hell. There's a reason why they say that. When people talk about war, there's two maxims. No plan survives initial contact with the enemy. So as perfect as your plan is, no matter how good you are, the moment you engage the enemy, that plan goes to hell. It becomes total chaos, and that's that. The second one is the enemy gets a vote. That means that no matter how much you want to do something, the enemy is going to do something that tries to prevent you from doing that. And so there's going to be hiccups. So when they say military error, what do they mean? Because I would say going to war is a military error right off the bat, because you've already introduced a problem set that means you're going to mess up. Mistakes are going to be made. But I know what he's saying. I know what he's talking about. Okay. You can't say that the way Russia went in is an error, because that implies that we know better than Putin, that we know better than the Russian military, that we are dismissive of the reasons why Russia decided to call it a special military operation and restrain the use of military force. Some people will say that's a military error, but war is an extension of politics by other means. So you have to respect the politics. You have to respect the politics, and there's legalities. Putin literally, I ask people to consider this. What did Russia say in justifying their decision to go into Ukraine? I wrote a big article about it, but I know most people didn't read it. It happens a lot. I post these articles, they read the headline, and they form their opinions based upon the headline. They never read the article. But
I know, that's amazing to me. It's as if reading it is more effort than writing it or something.
Maybe it is. Maybe. Well, I've been told that my writing style is very dense, and that some people struggle with my writing style. My wife struggles with my writing style. Seymour Hersh, one of my best friends, struggles with when you have a Pulitzer Prize winning writer say, Scott, this is tough to read. I mean, there's a lot of data here. Maybe I need to figure out how to write in more digestible ways. Marina's been telling me that the biggest problem is that, and the reason why people don't read my book is like a page 3. They're just stuck. The data overwhelms them. So, I have sympathy.
Is that why the title of your book has such a accessible name?
Don't pick.
I heard you criticizing yourself for that.
I like my title. But no, the point is, I write an article, it's in there, but here's the deal. Russia went to war citing Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Now, why is this important? Because prior to the initiation of the special military operation, Putin met with Xi, the Chinese president, in Beijing on February 4th, where they endorsed the notion of, here's the book, Disarming the Time of Perestroika. That's a beautiful title. A beautiful title. It's almost like Love in the Time of Cholera. Okay, this is the kind of title that all these people that give awards should be looking at, going, "My God, I want to give him the Pulitzer Prize for history for this book." I don't know if there's a grassroots campaign that you can start for that, but hey, everybody out there, that's a good idea. Why don't you start sending letters to the Pulitzer Committee saying this is the book that deserves the Pulitzer Prize? Without reading it, by the way, because you might get bogged down on page 3. But,
just read the cover.
Yeah, just the cover. The pictures are nice. There's some photographs in there too. I'll put that in there for all the Marines out there. There's some photographs and maps. Marines like maps. Go, ooh. So let's go to the what I'm saying about the law. Russia cited Article 51. That is the part of the United Nations Charter. And the reason why they're citing the United States Charter is that on February 4th, when they met in Beijing, Putin and President Xi said, "We're rejecting the rules-based international order that serves as the foundation of all American policy, and instead we're promoting what's called the law-based international order, which is founded in the principles of the United Nations Charter." So having said that, saying we're having a fundamental philosophical dispute with the United States on how the world should operate, and then Russia's going to move into Ukraine and say, well, hey, we said that, but we don't really mean it. We're just going to do whatever the hell we want in Ukraine. No, it doesn't work that way. Putin had to obey the law. And to cite Article 51, which is self-defense, it's one of there's only two ways you can go to war legally in this world because of the Charter. One is get a Chapter 7 resolution passed by the Security Council that authorizes the use of military force to rectify a threat to international peace and security. That's tough to do because you need all 5 of the permanent members. Got the math right this time. All 5 of the permanent members to agree. Usually 1 or 2 of them decide to veto. But if you can get all 5 to agree, you get a Chapter 7 resolution, you get to go to war. That's how I fought war. The war that I fought in, Operation Desert Storm, was authorized by a Security Council resolution passed under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. It's amazing when you fight a legal war. It's empowering. Maverick is like, yeah, baby.
First appearance of the night by Maverick.
Well, he was accompanied by the choir, Tegan and Machismo. But no, so Chapter 7. The other one is Article 51. That is defense. If you attack me, I have the right to defend myself. So under Article 51, you get to defend. And people go, what time out, Scott? Russia attacked. How do they get to cite defense? Well, there's a notion called preemptive self-defense. It goes back to something called the Caroline Affair, which took place in like 1830 something. But basically, it's a ship off the coast of Maine, and the British. There's an American ship that was running guns and stuff to support rebels who were fighting against the British in Canada, and the British preemptively took out the Caroline. They said that it was providing material support to the rebels. So rather than wait for the ship to land and transfer the goods, the British said, we're going to take the Caroline out. And it was a big deal. International scholars came together and they decided that the Caroline Affair set a legal precedent for preemptive self-defense. So you can preempt. That means that I don't have to sit there and watch you load a shotgun, write pamphlets about how you're going to blow my brains out, and then wait for you to walk across the street, put the shotgun to my head, and blow my brains out. I get to say, I feel there's an imminent threat as you walk across the street with the shotgun, and I get to shoot you dead. That's preemptive self-defense. And so the Russians said, we're going to cite preemptive self-defense, but now here's where it becomes even more interesting. How can Russia defend itself against Ukraine that's not threatening Russia? Ukraine wasn't threatening Russia. Ukraine was threatening the Donbass, which is Ukraine. And so it's an internal civil conflict that Russia cannot legally get involved in unless the two republics declare independence. And then they appeal to the Russian parliament to certify their independence. And then the Russian president certifies the parliamentary decision to certify. And now Russia recognizes the independence of these people, because now it's no longer an internal Ukrainian problem. It's Ukraine fighting two independent republics. But you're going to say, Scott, that's still not Russia. How does Russia get involved? And this is where Russia pulls the rabbit out of the hat, because now they cite the Kosovo precedent. You say, what is the Kosovo precedent, Scott? Well, the Kosovo precedent, or the Serbia precedent, is find me the Security Council resolution in 1999 that authorized NATO to launch offensive military action against Serbia. Bingo! Don't bother Googling it, people, because it don't exist. There is no Security Council resolution. So doesn't that make the NATO action against Serbia de facto a violation of international law? The answer is no, because NATO, and here's the other question, is NATO a member of the United Nations? Don't Google it again. I'll give you the cheat. I'm going to tell you, no, they're not a member of the United Nations. So how does NATO, which is not a member of the United Nations, get to cite United Nations Charter in authorizing the strike against Serbia? Because NATO is a collective security agreement of members of the United Nations. So a collective security pact gets to use the United Nations Charter, cite preemptive self-defense as justification for carrying out offensive military action. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. I've educated you. The Serbia/Kosovo precedent. And Russia cited it. And what did Russia do? They formed a collective security agreement with Lugansk and Donetsk. Now you have three allied nations. Lugansk and Donetsk say, we're under risk from attack from the Ukrainians. They said, yes, you are. And the Russians went, we are coming to your defense. And we determined that the 60,000 troops that have been built up in eastern Ukraine that are getting ready to invade Lugansk and Donetsk constitute an imminent threat to the security of the collective, so we can preemptively attack them under the notion of preemptive collective self-defense, Article 51, United Nations Charter. And that's why it's a special military operation, ladies and gentlemen, because that's the legal foundation that allows a special military operation to exist. Russia doesn't have to declare war. Russia simply gets to cite collective preemptive self-defense, Article 51, bingo.
All right, before we move on to the next question, I just want to mention, Tori was scrolling at the bottom there that we are requesting volunteers to help us, and that could be any kind of volunteer at all. You can imagine all the different aspects to our operation. But in particular, we've started to translate some of our videos into Russian since we have such a large audience there. So we're looking for more translators. It's very time consuming. And if we can divvy up the workload with some more people who can translate, that would be great. Also, voiceover actors. Anybody who can speak Russian and sound like kind of capture Scott's personality would be great. Easier said than done. Why don't you hire
me, Jeff? I'm a fluent Russian linguist.
All right, you want the job? You got it.
Yeah,
I figure you have enough to. I figure you have enough to do already.
I can't speak Russian, so that's a joke.
Yeah. All right. So Dragan from Serbia, our next question: are Russian strikes on power plants in Ukraine, in his opinion, a war crime or not?
Well, first of all, let me tell you right off the Dragan in Serbia that it's not a war crime. How do I know? Because I participated in this military action called Desert Storm. Part of Desert Storm had the strategic air campaign, which broke Iraq down into concentric circles of activity that affected Iraq's ability to wage war. Believe it or not, electrical power generation plants are legitimate targets of war. You want to know how they become a legitimate target of war? Let's say a Ukrainian general walks into his office and he turns on the light switch and the light bulb goes on. What made that light bulb go on? Because that light bulb just contributed to the war effort. And it's the power generation station. So it's a legitimate power of war. You're allowed to knock out the power of your enemy. It disrupts their economy. It disrupts the things. It's a legitimate target of war. You may call it a dick move, but war is a dick move. Killing people is a dick move. So once we've crossed that boundary, let's throw away the term dick move and just realize we're talking about war. War sucks. And so when we went to war with Iraq in 1991, we knocked the crap out of it. We blew up everything. We turned the power off. Wasn't a war crime. It's called war. Now, so first off, let's just forget trying to call what Russia did a war crime. Let's talk about what Russia did, though. Because if Scott Ritter was planning the Russian attack, there would be no power in eastern Ukraine today. Why? Because I would have turned the plant off forever. I would have hit it in a way it will never recover. You'll have to start from scratch the way Iraq did after the war, rebuilding their power generation capacity from scratch, from the ground up, because we knocked everything else out. Why didn't Russia do that? Because it wasn't their goal and objective. Well, then what's the sense in bombing? I mean, if you're going to take out the power in Kharkov for 24 hours, they turned it back on in 24 hours, which they did. Why did you bomb it? Ask yourself why they bombed it. At the time that the bombing took place, Russia was going through one of the biggest military defeats it's suffered in modern history. What happened in Kharkov? The Ukrainians had them on the run. The Russians were fighting with a rapid withdrawal action, trying to get their people out of harm's way, trying to reconstitute a defensive belt. And, again, anybody who's done the war, done military stuff, know that the unit by itself tends to die. To function on a battlefield, if I'm a unit, I got to tie in with the unit on my left and my right. I got to make sure we have our boundaries down, that we've coordinated, that we know what the boundaries are. We have supporting fires and all this stuff. That takes time to do. Battlefield reconnaissance. You have to draw up paperwork. I need to defend in depth. I have to make sure that I might have two of me up front, one of me in the rear. I've got to organize that, pick out the spacing, obstacle belts. There's a lot that goes into this. It's not just a bunch of people decide that I'm going to lie down right now and point a rifle and I'm defending. It doesn't work that way. Normally takes a long time to prepare a defense. Russia didn't have prepared defense along the Oxil River, which they've come back to the geographical features defining their new defensive line. So Russian troops were coming out of a very chaotic situation where a lot of them abandoned equipment, a lot of them abandoned munitions, a lot of them are have lost cohesiveness. They're coming back. They're trying to establish a defensive line while the Ukrainians are pressing forward. Now, anybody, again, who fights war knows this reality. The most dangerous time for a unit is when chaos is at its maximum. So either somebody newly occupying a position, either in the defense or in the offense. You learn right off in the Marine Corps. If I'm defending a hill and the enemy pushes me off the hill, now you're going to say, well, that means you got beat. Right there, yeah. But as I pull out the hill, the enemy's in total chaos at that point in time. They may have taken the hill, but they don't know where their people are. They don't know how much ammunition people have. They're not talking with each other. They don't have a fire plan down. They're very weak. So what's the first thing you do as a defender? Bing, counterattack. So you consolidate and you run back in and you push them off the hill and you take the hill. Well, you do the same thing. As the Russians are trying to build this defensive line, the number one goal for the Ukrainians is to knock the crap out of them, continue to push through this defensive line because the Russians are in chaos. How does Russia handle that? Turn out the lights. And that's what Russia did. They reached out and they touched a whole bunch of electrical power plants and the lights went out. It's like the nights the light went out in Georgia, baby. It's done. There's no lights. And when that happens, the Ukrainians stop. It freezes everything. They can't move equipment. They can't coordinate. They can't command. They got nothing. And it bought the Russians time for their defenders to consolidate the defensive line along the Oxil River. And when the lights came back on 24 hours later, the Russians looked at it and went, we're still a little risky here. Let's shut down Kharkiv one more time. And they blew that up, shut it down one more time. But not totally. It's back up, which means the Russians never intended to knock out the power for the civilians. Russia intended to buy time for defense. It's a legitimate military target for legitimate military purposes. End of story. When this history of this battle is written, and it's going to be a fascinating history of this war, what happened there, the taking out of the power grid, and the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the dam. The Russians popped a dam, releasing water. People say, isn't that a war crime? No. Why did they pop it? How many people died in all of this, all blowing up everything? How many people died? One civilian died, and I'm sorry that civilian died. This wasn't an attack on civilian infrastructure. This was attack on legitimate military targets. They hit the dam, the water got released. The way this was working is down that river, the Ukrainians had put a significant force on one side of the river that was getting ready to launch an attack against the Russians. The Russians are a little unsteady right now because they've been moving resources. They're concerned that if the Ukrainians attacked at that point, they might break through the line. What the Russians did is pop the dam. The water came down. First of all, it flooded the city of Kryvyi Rog, which was the logistical hub and command and control hub of this particular area. It's very difficult to command when your city is flooded. And things don't move too well. So they bogged them down there, but then the water came down and swept away every bridge that had been across that river. All the pontoon bridges that had been built by NATO and by Ukraine to allow the resupply of these troops went away. And once they did that, these troops now were in a world of hurt, and they're in a world of hurt right now. Russia is pounding them with artillery, with airstrikes, and this force is no longer a threat. So hitting the dam actually created a new defensible barrier that shaped the battlefield to Russia's benefit. And that's why they did it. Purely military objectives, no war crime.
All right. So can we say that it was a dick question?
No, I will never. No, the only bad question is the one that's never asked.
All right. Damon from Australia. If Russia labels the Ukrainian regime a terrorist organization, will that change what the Russian military will target and destroy? And will it allow for a greater use and deployment of the Russian armed forces?
I'm going to start off by saying that I will not pretend to be an expert on Russian law, meaning that I haven't written a PhD thesis on this. I haven't done the in-depth research on this. I can't cite precedent, etc. But I have done enough reading to basically say yes, that what would be required to free Russia up on the ability to carry out certain strikes within the framework of international law, because remember, it's very important. International law is very important here. I went through a long explanation about Article 51. So Russia's not, having done all that, going to deviate and suddenly start breaking the law. Although that's a good song. I think Beavis and Butthead used to sing it. But by calling the Ukrainians a terrorist organization, you then turn this from a special military operation into a counterterrorism operation. And that gives Russia great latitude. But here's the problem. Ukraine has been trying for some time now to get Russia labeled a terrorist organization. They've been screaming it. And Europe's been doing it. Congress just passed legislation trying to get Russia labeled a terrorist organization. Russia has told the United States straight up, if you label us a terrorist organization, we will cut all diplomatic relations. That's it. We're shutting down the embassies, kicking everybody out. We're done. And any student of history knows that that's the first step to general war. So does the United States really want to go have general war with Russia? And the answer, of course, is no, which is why, despite everybody trying to score cheap political points by saying Russia's a terrorist organization, Biden, Blinken, and everybody else went, we ain't doing that. We're not going to. Remember, Biden was asked straight up, is Russia a terrorist organization? He said no, because he knows that if you do that, it's a game changer, and it's in the bad way. So now, if Russia doesn't want to be called a terrorist organization, it better be careful about putting labels on other nations as well. So even though from a legal empowerment issue, labeling Ukraine a terrorist organization so you now can have a counterterrorism operation might work under the framework of Russian law, it creates a significant political problem with Russia, because once Russia plays that game and starts throwing the label around, the United States is going to throw it right back in their face. So I don't believe Russia is going to make that move. I think Russia is going to work with an expansive definition of the special military operation, and they're going to resolve the issue of getting more troops through an expanded volunteer program. The Chechen president Kadyrov has taken the lead on this. Governors of various Russian districts are going to be stepping up, and I think you're going to see over the course of the coming winter somewhere between 100 and 200,000 fresh volunteers recruited, trained, equipped, and sent to the front.
Okay. Thanks a lot to Steve-O, one of our regular viewers, for all the generosity with the super chats. And to the rest of you, be more like Steve-O, won't you? Jeff Maddox from Australia. You said the Dark Eagle hypersonic missiles being deployed to Germany will end in disaster, but haven't SLBM's submarine, what does that stand for? SLBM?
Submarine launched ballistic missile. Yeah.
Submarine-launched ballistic missiles long had the ability to hit Moscow with a warning of less than 10 minutes. So do the Dark Eagle missiles really increase the risk?
Well, I mean, the submarine-launched ballistic missile, in order to hit Moscow or any target in that short of time frame, they have to come very close to the shore. They can't launch it from their traditional boomer area of operations because that usually the submarine needs deep water. It needs to be weighed down at the bottom. It comes up periodically, runs out its wires, gets to see if they have any signals, then they go back down and they hide. And then when war comes, they'll come up at the right moment and they'll fire their missiles off and off they go. But the deepest water is usually deep in the ocean. and the closer you get to shore, the more likely you are to run into, buoys, sonar buoys, a system, a SOSUS type system that we run off in the Atlantic to detect the movement of submarines. The Chinese have them, the Russians have them. You also run into aircraft, and you run into a thicker density of submarines that are patrolling looking for you. The point I'm trying to make is to get that, the boomer would have to come in close, and then it fires the Trident on a flatter trajectory. So instead of the Trident going up this way, the Trident's a flatter trajectory because it's flying a shorter distance, and the time of flight is significantly reduced. So yeah, you're right. In theory, these boomers can come up and fire these flat trajectory Tridents, and there they go. It'll be a problem, though, because the Trident is a multiple warhead missile, and the best accuracy from the warhead comes from a higher distance when the bus gets released, and then the bus sits there and then releases the missiles at a precision point so they hit their target. You fire a flatter trajectory, you're not going to get the same accuracy because basically the geometry doesn't work the same. But yeah, no, theoretically he's correct. Here's the problem. Technology has advanced so much that, let me put it this way. If we can detect a blue whale in the ocean, we can detect a submarine. And submarines aren't the super weapon that people think they are. Nobody wants to talk about it because this is one of the biggest secrets in the world, the defense of submarines. But without giving away the farm, I'm just going to tell you right now that submarines don't have the security today that they used to have. So, yeah, you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. But here's the other thing, too. The hypersonic warhead of the Dark Eagle is not nuclear. Okay, the warhead on the Trident submarine is nuclear. And so by firing the Trident, you're firing a nuclear warhead, and you're basically ending the world, as we know. Because no matter what your type of flight is, let's say we succeeded. We popped all those Tridents off, and we got 30 Tridents coming in, and they flatten Moscow. It's done. Moscow's a stinking hole. Everybody's dead. Nobody's alive. Did that win the war? No, because the Russians have something called the perimeter system. It's the dead hand. See, the perimeter system is on full automatic 24/7. It has sensors all over Russia, and those sensors detect radiation levels. They detect, shaking. When you pop off a nuke, the world tends to shake. There's a nice little earthquake type thing. It detects that. It detects radiation. It detects noise. It detects the fact that nobody's communicating. There's standard communications that get released by the Russians on time at different periodic things. And if they stop communicating, perimeter automatically kicks on and starts looking for these indicators of having been attacked. And if perimeter decides on its own, artificial intelligence with no human interlink, that, oh my God, we've been attacked, then perimeter fires these missiles that have the communication package on them. And these missiles fly across the breadth of Russia, sending out, fire everything. And guess what happens? Everything gets fired automatically. So why would you fire a Trident missile against Moscow knowing that the dead hand is going to kick in and Russia's automatically going to release everything against the United States? So let's remove the Trident from the equation right now. Let's talk about Dark Eagle. Dark Eagle is a hypersonic system. It was supposed to be deployed this summer. It's not. Why? The United States has problems with hypersonics, apparently. We haven't perfected the weapon. So even though we stood up the brigade, even though we've taken the steps to deploy the initial support equipment, the actual missile system's not ready for employment. But the hypersonic, not unconventional warhead of the Dark Eagle is what gives it its ability. Because now you can fire a non-nuclear warhead that can hit Moscow in 10 minutes and decapitate because it's very accurate. And that's the concern. But here's and the beauty of the Dark Eagle is it decapitates without radiation. So maybe the perimeter system won't take off. But it's stupid because because it's not nuclear. What are you going to do? Kill Putin? And then what? You think Russia's going to surrender once Putin's dead? You think Russia's really that simple of a nation? Or maybe Russia's going to fall back on its backup leadership principles. They have people in bunkers just like we do. And those people are going to say, you just decapitated our boss. Push the button. Goodbye, America. Because one of the Russian conditions for the launch of nuclear weapons is any attack by any nation that seeks to decapitate the leadership of Russia. So Dark Eagle is just a stupid weapon. It shouldn't be around. We really need to get a new INF treaty in place. Boom, another plug for my book. Why is the INF treaty important? But that's why I think Dark Eagle is an absolute disaster. Thank you for the graphic of the book, the beautifully named book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. Rolls off the tongue.
Hey, it was you who commented in some other podcast that it was a difficult name. By the way, I know you don't look at most of the comments, but I just want to let you know that a lot of folks are saying that they really appreciate your willingness to address the prison issue and also the way you addressed it. So you're getting a lot of love from the audience, which is nice.
Well, I was going to make a movie about me being a prison coach. So I would teach people how to survive in prison. But then I found out that Kevin Hart made that movie with Will Ferrell. So,
well, there's another way to. There are other ways that experience. So there's in due time. All right. So wouldn't be a show without S. Anderson. And now we learn a little bit more about S, who is from Irvine, California. Now, for the first time, we learn where S resides. To stave off an attack on the city of Donetsk. How do you pronounce that? Donetsk? Donetsk. I can't say it the right way. Do you think the Duma would
You're
pass
an American,
legislation?
Jeff. Anytime you pronounce a word, it's the right way. That's the beauty of being an American. We have the right to mispronounce anything and everything unapologetically.
All right. I am, when I used to do hidden camera pranks, we pitched a show. It was going to be Global Hidden Camera Pranks with me as the lead in it. And the name of the show was The Ugly American. This was actually being pitched to TV networks. And what happened was 9/11 occurred. And then all of a sudden it didn't seem so funny for American to be acting obnoxious around the globe. So that was the end of my TV career. But that's
sweet.
Yeah, right. The Ugly American is what went to my. All right, here's the question: to stave off an attack, do you think the Duma would pass legislation bringing the DPR-controlled area into the Russian Federation?
Well, the thing is, the Duma can't undertake an action on its own. The Donetsk is an independent nation. Russia has recognized it as such. Therefore, the Russian Duma has no authority, legality to decide anything on its own. It would have to be requested by Donetsk to have Donetsk join the Russian Federation. And then the Duma could consider that, pass legislation that would then go to the various, I think it would go up to the Federal Assembly, then it would go over to the president. And if they all approved it, then there could be that. Generally speaking, on something like that, you need a referendum to take place. And so I think there would have to be a referendum in Donetsk on that question before we move. So I don't believe that the Russian parliament is going to act, because it can't. It has no legal foundation, no legal ability to act preemptively on this. The Russians are very legal, and everything has to be done in accordance with the right legal procedure. And so Parliament simply passing a legislation like that doesn't do anything.
All right, Matt C. from South Africa. Do you think Russia's counterattack in the north of Ukraine will be more brutal, since many of the civilians in the area fled to Russia when Ukraine attacked?
Well, I think that Russia, one area where the gloves are starting to come off is the Russian approach to fighting the Ukrainian army. Russia did come in soft. They were ordered not, Russia hasn't done some of the nasty tricks that people do in war, like bomb barracks, and that they've hit a couple where the mercenaries are. But generally speaking, when a Ukrainian soldier goes to sleep at night, rests pretty easy because the Russians have decided they're not in the business of slaughtering Ukrainian soldiers. So when the Ukrainians go back into the rear area, they're really, but they've been taking the gloves off lately. They hit a train, bringing troops to the front, killing a couple hundred of them, and they're bringing in new weapons. They're starting to deploy, these thermobaric weapons, these fuel air explosives that they're dropping on troop concentrations. And it's just, it kills everybody in horrific fashion. And they're starting to employ these more and more. They're bringing in their Air Force and they're dropping these bombs on troop concentrations. They never did this before. Why? Because they don't want to be seen accused of Russia trying to kill Ukrainians. If Russia is forced to defend itself, it will defend itself. But I think it's coming off. Russia is basically viewing the Ukrainian military as a NATO military now. And so it's fair game. And so Russia's taken the gloves off with the military, and you're going to see an increase in lethality. I don't want to call it brutal. I'll just call it lethality, because war is inherently brutal. I mean, tell me a non-brutal way to kill people. You don't. I always laugh when, people, they had this weapon called the Quad 50. It was basically 4 50 caliber machine guns, and they used it as an anti-aircraft platform. But the Quad 50 in the Korean War was very good at stopping Chinese human wave attacks. You just flipped the Quad 50 down and you took a lot of Chinese out. But technically that was considered a war crime, because the 50 caliber round wasn't supposed to be an anti-personnel round. It was an anti-equipment round. Therefore, it was, what's the term they use? It was cruel and inhumane. So I can fire a 5.56 round that comes out of the barrel spinning and then starts to tumble, so that when it hits the arm, it goes through here, rips everything out, and leaves the person on the ground with their guts out, bleeding to death in great agony. That's humane. But I can't fire a 50 caliber round, kills you instantly. That's inhumane. I love when they go down this route. I hate the weak liberal punks that come up with this thing. Tell you what, if you don't want to fight war, don't start a war. But once you start a war, don't tell me how to kill the enemy. I'll kill the enemy the way they need to be killed, which is all of them die, none of my guys die. That's the way to do it. Now, the Russians aren't going to hurt civilians. They've made this point clear. And again, when this history is written, the story after, so I'll give you an example. Just recently, there was an Italian journalist. I don't remember his name, but he was on the Ukrainian side and he wanted to get over and cover the story on the Russian side. And so the Ukrainians led him to the front line and said, go through this path. And he had a driver with him, and they were going to drive through this path to get to the Russian side. But what the Ukrainians didn't tell him is they put mines in that path. And they were literally trying to get this guy to go in there and blow up and die so they could say the Russians killed this guy. But the problem is the vehicle hit a mine and he lived. Now what happened? The Russians, who had nothing to do with this guy, but they saw a man in need. The Russians went into the kill zone, a minefield, and pulled this guy out and saved his life while they're getting shot at by the Ukrainians. And the problem for Ukraine is the dude lived, and he was able to tell the whole story about the Ukrainians telling them what to do. Ukraine does that all the time. We're dealing with a warped bunch of people here. I think if you
What's this reporter's name, Scott?
Well, he's Italian, so it's probably Carlo. But
Probably Carlo. Do you know if he speaks English?
Yeah, no, he spoke English on the.
Oh.
There's a video clip. If you Google it, you'll find the video clip.
That's a fascinating story. Should we try to get him on and talk to him?
If you can find him, he's badly hurt. He's badly hurt.
Oh, he survived, but he's not doing well.
I mean, he's going to live, but I mean, this is a dude that's effed up. So, but the point is, the Russians saved his life, and there is story after story after story. When the story is told about the battle for Mariupol, the city of Mariupol, which was held by the Azov Nazis, one of the stories that's going to come out is about how the Azov people fortified the upper floors of apartment buildings, but kept the Ukrainian civilians in the bottom floor, kept them there. If the Ukrainians tried to leave, they shoot them. They shoot the kids. They'd shoot the women. They'd shoot the old people. They kept them all downstairs. And why? Because they knew the Russians weren't going to blow up the building as long as there were civilians in there. This means that the Russians had to close with and carry out deadly assaults on the building. What's the first things the Russians did? They assaulted the building, got to the civilians, and got them all out. evacuated them all, losing their guys in the process. So they're sacrificing their lives to save the civilians. And only then did they go in and take out the bad guys. But, people criticize these Russian soldiers. And I know people are going to be able to come up with, private first class, Igor Schmuckatelli who committed a crime. Yeah, it happens. Bad people do bad things, but most of the Russian soldiers are really, really good people who were raised right, and they're doing the right thing. And they're saving civilian lives, and they save so many Ukrainian civilians. So when the Russians come back into Kharkov, they will, or when they go into Odessa, they will. You're not going to see what's going on in Kharkov today. You know what's going on in Kharkov today? Ask our good friend Gary Tabak. He'll tell you. He's the guy that the former U.S. Navy captain that proudly has an American flag in his background with the Right Sector banner draped over. Right Sector, the neo-Nazi organization. So he's basically saying that Right Sector is better than America. He gave an interview in a British tabloid 2 days ago where he brags about how Ukraine is hunting down and killing Russian collaborators. This is an American military officer who is allied with a Nazi organization, bragging about the summary justice that's being put on by the Ukrainians, who are Nazis, murdering anybody deemed to be a collaborator. Ukrainians are bragging about what they call filtration. Filtration is going through, and you right now have Ukrainian, pro-Ukrainian people who are living in there who know everybody who worked with the Russians. They've gone in, they've painted Z on all the homes of the suspected collaborators. And the Nazi thugs are going in there, kicking down the door. They're taking the men out, shooting them in the streets, taking the women, the children away. And we don't know what they're doing, but we do know what they're doing. And this is being done in broad daylight, and nobody in the West is reporting it, except Gary Tabak. Hey, thanks, Gary, for telling the truth about the murderous, rapacious thugs that exist in Ukraine.
Mattia Sorbi. Somebody said they think that's the name of the Italian reporter. Is that ringing a bell with you, Scott?
That might be it. It wasn't Carlo, it was Mattia. But I'm sorry, I'm tired. I shouldn't make bad jokes.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Well, I am, because Marina's very mad at me right now. She doesn't like my jokes.
Give him a break, Marina. Come on. How do you pronounce this name, Scott?
Seguin Duke.
Okay. Please name your top 3 favorite books and tell us about them. Let's maybe just briefly, because we have a few more questions. We don't want to go on too much.
Wait a minute now. I am a well-educated, literate man. I should be allowed to talk about my top 3 favorite books.
Okay. I withdraw my my suggestion.
I will start with number 3. Number 3 is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by Jean Le Carré. It is, and this guy, Michael, you're absolutely correct. I stand corrected. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is one of the best spy novels ever written. It gets into the psychology of espionage. When people speak about intelligence officers and real intelligence work, it's not James Bond. I mean, that's action movie and stuff like that. Intelligence officers are, guys who sit behind desks and do a lot of research, and they just do a lot of thinking and a lot of stuff like that. But it's psychologically draining, especially when you get into the spy versus spy game, the brain game that has life and death consequences. And The Spy Who Came In From the Cold captures this perfectly. It sends a chill up my spine every time I read it. Great book. Book number 2 is Armageddon by Leon Uris. It's a novel about the Berlin airlift, and it is just literally a heartbreaking story. So I would encourage people to read that. It's, I lived in Germany. My father was stationed there. I've been to Berlin when it was a divided city, and it just captures the story of Berlin post World War II, Soviet occupation, American occupation, French occupation, British occupation, and then the decision to shut down the city, force an airlift, and what went into the airlift. And it's just a really, really good book. And Leon Uris is an outstanding author. Number 1 book of all time, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, Jean Le Carré. Yes, he's on twice. If The Spy Who Came In From the Cold gets into the psychology, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy talks about the big picture espionage game that resonates deeply with me, because a lot of what they do in that book is the kind of stuff that I was peripherally involved in when I used to do that business. So it resonates with me. The way he portrays the characters, they come to life, they're real. And I recognize me and I recognize other intelligence officers in each character that he puts out there. One of the best books of all time is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So there it is, top 3 books.
Wow, it sounds like you have previously thought about your top 3 favorite books. You had a ready-made answer. Amazing. Michael from Winnipeg, Canada. According to the UN, between February 22nd and September 7th, 5,718 civilians were killed in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you believe this number? And if so, what does this tell us about how Russia is conducting the war?
It's not that I disbelieve the number. I think the number's low because I think there's a lot of bodies out there that just haven't been accounted for. War is hell, people die, and a lot of times there's sanitary reasons to remove bodies without counting them. So trenches will be dug, bodies will be put in there, trenches will be done, and those graves will be marked for later counting. So I think you could probably double that number. I think that you're probably at this point in time looking at over 10,000 civilians having been killed. It's not because the UN's doing the wrong thing. They're just, the numbers they're reporting are verified numbers. But I believe that just because of the way war is and the way this war's gone with going back and forth, that there's a lot of graves out there that once this war stops, the records will be brought in and you'll have the grave registration people come in. We did this in World War II. I mean, it's not like there's something wrong going on here. In World War II, we just bulldozed bodies into things, pumped a marker on it, and we had to wait till afterwards to come in, exhume the bodies, and actually start doing the detailed record keeping. You have to put a body in the ground or burn it because it becomes a sanitary problem. So I think there's twice as many, but still, it's a very low number, especially for the amount of fighting that's been going on. To give you an example, normally there's a roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between combatant deaths and civilian deaths. And so right now, again, we don't know the number of dead, but I'm going to throw a rough number out there that I think it's probably close to being accurate. The Ukraine has suffered between 80 and 90,000 dead combatants, and the Russians have suffered between 15 and 20,000 dead combatants. So that means we're looking at over 100,000 dead combatants on both sides, which means there should be 100,000 dead civilians. The fact that there's only 10,000 dead civilians, and the UN saying there's only, there's less than that, means that the civilians are avoiding a war, and this war is being fought in urban areas. This war is being fought in populated areas, and yet the civilians aren't paying the price. When we took out, the Normandy campaign, a lot of people, they always talk about how France is, hey, the liberators. We killed 60,000 French civilians in the Normandy campaign. 60,000. That's what war does in civilian areas. So here we went in Russia went in, and there's 10,000 dead. How did that happen? Because Russia's not targeting civilians. The Russians, because of the special military operation, because of the need not to needlessly kill Ukrainian civilians or Ukrainian infrastructure, Russia's taking the extra mile to be careful with their targeting, even when the Ukrainians use the Ukrainian civilian population as a human shield, and I'm not making this up. The Washington Post did a detailed report on it. They were very uncomfortable with their conclusions, but they had to conclude that it looks like the Ukrainians are digging in a residential area, using them as human shields. That would be a war crime. And Amnesty International came out with a detailed report that basically says straight up, Ukraine is committing war crimes by using the civilian population as a human shield. Now, here's the thing about using them as a human shield. Once Ukraine does that, those civilians lose all protection. It's a bad day to be a civilian when you have war criminals using you as a human shield. But just because they're using a human shield doesn't mean that the military necessity of striking that target goes away. It's still there. So Russia would have every legal right. We go back to that apartment building. If that place is heavily fortified and they're popping tanks, they're popping my boys when they're coming across the field, and I'm taking casualties, I got to reduce that position so I can move on to the next position. But there's 200 civilians in the basement. Let me give you the American solution. Drop the building. Drop it. But you're going to kill 200 civilians. Collateral damage. Drop the building. We're not going to allow that to disrupt our attack. There's military necessity to do this, and it's not a war crime. What's the Russian solution? Stop the battle, which means stop the momentum, sacrifice lives to get the civilians out before you drop the building. But even then, you don't drop the building. Why? Because someday the war is going to end, and that building is going to have to be reoccupied by the civilian population. Russia has that in their mind, too. They're trying to preserve civilian infrastructure so that when the war ends, life can return to normal as soon as possible. The Russians are doing heroic things. And everything, Ritter, you're a pro-Russian propagandist. No, I'm just telling you the truth. Russia's bending over backwards not to hurt civilians. And they're setting a standard for the conduct of a military and large-scale warfare that I would like to see the United Nations embrace and say, this is how it's done. This is the new standard, not the American way. Look at the Battle of Mosul. Look at the Battle of Fallujah. Look at the Battle of Raqqa and what we did to the civilian populations there. None of it being a war crime. All of it legitimized as collateral damage, but we wiped them out. If they were in the way of the fighting, if they were deemed to be, collateral damage, then that was it. The Russians aren't playing the collateral damage game. They're being very, very careful on how they target, how they operate. And unfortunately, because you're not allowed to say anything that could be deemed as pro-Russian or sympathetic for Russian, the world's ignoring this lesson. But everybody who studies this problem knows that that's the truth.
Russia, if you're listening.
Okay, Ron Yu from Hong Kong. How do you manage to quickly transition from writing to doing an interview on short notice? How do you manage to recall numerous details while keeping your facts straight?
Well, I think as people are finding out with Ask the Inspector, I fumble a lot because I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I do a lot better writing than I do speaking under these conditions. I mean, right now, I'm just to be honest, I did a whole bunch of interviews today and I'm exhausted. So my brain's wandering all over the place and I may fumble a fact here or there. I try to be pretty assiduous with the facts. I try to be pretty, accurate. If I make a mistake, I'll own up to the mistake. Writing, it's different. I'm held to a different standard there because there's no excuse for writing an error. I have plenty of time to do the research and get it right. Plus, I have a professional editor who monitors everything I write. Call my wife. So she's very good at holding me to account to that standard. Look, if you spend your whole day researching and writing, the data's in your head already. And what happens when I wake up in the morning is I will start writing an article about a current event, or I'll be considering an article. I'll be doing the research on it. Anytime something happens, I begin to research it as if I'm going to write an article, because eventually I probably will have to write an article about that. And so when someone says, hey, we'd like to talk to you about this issue, I've already done the research, not because I knew there was going to be an interview, but because I've done the preparatory work for the writing. And so I have the benefit of, tying into that work when I speak. But this is what I do too. I mean, I have to, it's not like I'm, like I have a day job where I go off and I do law, or I do this, or I do that. And then I come in here and this is my particular activity. This is what I do for a living. I'm a professional writer, a professional analyst. So I better know the facts. I better have it. And I thank you for the compliment, because that means I'm doing something right if the perception is there that I can extemporaneously talk about this. So I try to do my best. I recognize that I'm not perfect. And if I ever make a mistake, I'll be the first one to own up to it.
Okay, as you just did in that recent article that we were. Anonymous from India. I wonder if this is the Anonymous. Who knows? Do you think it was right for Russia to preemptively take over Crimea in 2014? Why didn't they wait it out like they waited 8 years for Donbas?
Well, first of all, Crimea is home to Sevastopol, which is a major Russian naval base. So it has strategic importance. And Russia is not going to allow the Sevastopol naval base to come under foreign control. So one of the reasons why Russia was so keen on making sure Crimea didn't go over and be taken over by the Ukrainian nationalists, because that's why they moved in. Let's not think that Russia woke up one day and said, screw it, let's take Ukraine. The reason why they moved into Ukraine is that there was a coup d'etat through the Maidan revolution in February that overthrew the legally elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, and the CIA-backed right sector thugs, neo-Nazi Azov types, although they're not Azov yet, they're the Kharkov Men's Soccer Club, and other groups coming from Lvov and Western Ukraine, decide that they're going to come in and purge the Russians from areas in Ukraine. So they went to Odessa. They organized riots. They stuffed 150 ethnic Russians and Russian speakers into a trade union building and set it on fire, and then surrounded it, preventing people from leaving, and applied as burning bodies jumped out of the building. These are really good guys. You know who was in Odessa on that time too? Our friend Gary Tabak, the American who works for the right sector, was in Odessa when this attack. I'm not saying he was there, but he certainly is affiliated with the people that committed the crime. Don't ever put the right sector flag over the American flag, Gary. I got a problem with that. But then they did that, and then they made a move on Mariupol. They assaulted Mariupol, the city, and when the history of that's done, people write books about the rape of Nanking by the Japanese. Well, the rape of Mariupol by the Azov people is also a book that needs to be read. But it's not going to be a book that has to be imagined, by things. What do criminals do when they, these brutal thugs that have become the Azov regiment? What do they do for a living? They document everything they do, and they do it with a cell phone. So every rape of a child, every rape of a woman, every murder, every torture has been filmed while they gleefully do it. And guess who has all those videotapes right now? Guess who seized all the cell phones? The Russians. They have all this stuff, and they're cataloging right now in a very comprehensive manner. So when the trials are held, the Russians are going to be able to say, this guy did this. Here's the videotape. There he is doing what he's accused of doing. These are brutal thugs. And this is why the ethnic Russian population of Donbass rose up and said, no, we're done. We're not doing this. We saw what you did to Mariupol. We're going to declare the Donbass to be independent. Russia said, well, you can't be independent, but we're going to fight for your rights. So there was some legality issues. But when the Azov said, we're going to pivot on Crimea, which is overwhelmingly populated by Russians who, even though they're now part of Ukraine, never identified with Ukraine. Crimea didn't become part of Ukraine until the 1950s when Nikita Khrushchev gifted it to Ukraine. And because it was the Soviet Union at the time, people, they're like, okay, but it's still the Soviet Union. It's still part of the big, nation of the Soviet state. But now the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine becomes independent, and the Russians in Crimea are going, we didn't want this. We don't want to be affiliated with Kiev, because Kiev now is talking about being Ukrainian. We don't identify as being Ukrainian. We identify as being, we look to Moscow. We don't look to Kiev. But, the Russian government recognized Crimea as being an integral part of Ukraine and worked with Ukraine to have normalized relationships. And one of the key things that was to this is that the naval base in Sevastopol would be Russian. Russia signed a long-term lease. And these nationalists were saying, that ain't going to happen. We're going to take over all of Crimea. And Russia said, no, you're not. And they mobilized the little green men, and they came in and they took it. So that's why Russia did in 2014. There was a strategic reason to keep Crimea from going over to Ukraine. Donbass, there were legal reasons why Russia didn't recognize the independence of that, because Russia didn't want to violate the territorial integrity of the rest of Ukraine. They knew they already had, kicked up a hornet's nest about Crimea, but Crimea is Russian. It's never been Ukrainian. There was a gift given by Nikita Khrushchev, but it's never been Ukrainian. Donbass was a gift given by Stalin and by Lenin, but it was considered to be an important part of Ukraine, because that's, the Donbass is like the Ruhr Valley in Germany. It's where basically the industrial heart of Ukraine is. That's where their coal mines are. That's where a lot of their resources come from. So you couldn't have an economically viable Ukraine unless you had the Donbass. That's why Russia wasn't willing to strip it away. But now that the Ukrainians have decided, and again, here's an exercise for everybody listening tonight, and they may not understand this. The Ukrainian government, parliament, president signed it. has passed a series of laws that basically make it illegal to be a Russian. First of all, they call Russians orcs. They're subhumans. They don't view them as human beings. So your Ukrainian nationalist views themselves as an Aryan elite. They view the Russians as orcs, subhumans. Don't believe me? Google it. Then, except I keep telling you not.
Wait a minute. Yeah, do we like Google or do we not like Google?
Well, okay, don't Google it. Use another search engine. But the point is, they call them orcs. But then they pass laws that basically ban the Russian language, ban Russian culture, ban Russian paintings, Russian art, Russian history, everything. Now imagine this. I just said all that. Now close your eyes and remove the word Russian and insert the word Jew. And you realize that the Ukrainian government has become the Nazi government of Germany. The same laws that Nazi government used to attack the Jewish population, the Ukrainians are using the very same legal structure to attack the Russians. And ask yourself why any Russian would want to live under the authority of that government. So that's a lot of reason why Russia's doing what it's doing right now. This isn't a game. It's not, this isn't some sort of political exercise. There's a lot of Americans right now that live in denial. They're denying. There's not a Nazi problem. There's a huge Nazi problem in Ukraine. Ukraine is a Nazi nation right now. People tend to remember, forget that only a small percentage of Germans were actually members of the Nazi Party and of the Waffen-SS. And yet the Nazi Party governed Germany and the Waffen-SS intimidated Germany. The same thing. People say, well, the right sector and Sloboda and in these parties, they're just a small percentage of it. Yeah, but they're the only ones allowed to exist right now. All other parties have been banned, and they control the muscle. They control the thugs who terrorize people in the streets. Ukraine has a Nazi problem. Ukraine is a Nazi problem.
Okay. Tatiana Lantz from San Diego, California. Have you ever met Gary Walker? He came up with a way to destroy nuclear weapons. Gary passed away in 2014 and left behind a legacy.
I have not. I'm not familiar with the name. I'm not familiar with his methodology for destroying nuclear weapons, but.
Note to self.
Okay, I will look up Gary Walker.
All right. And we've come to the final prepared question submitted in advance by our beloved audience. Dennis Mara from Florida, where will an M90 tanks be deployed?
I think he means the T90.
Okay.
Because I'm not aware of an M90, but there is a T90 tank, which is a very modern Russian tank with a lot of really cool reactive armor and protective systems. They have this system that has radars on it, and if you fire like a javelin missile at it, the javelin missile likes to fly over the top of a tank and then have its warhead shoot down and come in through the thinner armor on the top. But as the javelin missile comes in, the radar on the tank will detect the javelin missile and will fire its own anti-missile system and intercept it. It has reactive armor, so if you fire a round, this armor will come in, and normally reactive armor waits for you to hit the armor, and then the armor explodes and dissipates because it's a shaped charge. So the idea is if you have steel, the armor hits, it's got a shaped charge, it's a little cone device, and it hits, and the shaped charge transforms the copper there into this molten core. It's like a laser beam that cuts through the armor, and then this molten core gets into the middle of the tank and starts splattering around, blows everything up, and wham, you do it. So reactive armor comes in, you hit the reactive armor, and the reactive armor blows up and dissipates the shaped charge. So it explodes on contact. But weapons designers, being what they are, have designed a variant of the weapon that can penetrate that explosive charge and still get the thing. So this new Russian thing, as you come in, it actually will explode out to meet the weapon. So it'll send its own charge out to disrupt the round. It's a very advanced tank, very modern. And my understanding is that there's some video imagery that shows T-90 tanks on heavy equipment trailers, HETs, being transported in the vicinity of the Ukrainian front. So I think if it hasn't already been at the front, it's getting ready to be deployed to the front. And it's one of the most advanced. The only thing more advanced than that is the T-14 Armada tank. But that tank is still going through its development phases. Russia is supposed to be producing them. Russian industry has in this area has some limited production capacity, so they're not able just to mass produce T-14. So we're not seeing the T-14. Yeah, I mean, look, Mehdi, you're right. Look, I'm trying to explain something simply here, so that's the idea. To knock the kinetic round offline. You said it better. Take Mehdi's definition, but the T-14 isn't produced in the numbers necessary to have a meaningful impact on the battle. And I don't know if Russia is a fan of sending an untested weapon. That's another reason why we haven't seen too many of the Su-57s, which is the advanced Russian fighter that can, do amazing tricks in the air, flip, roll, spin, dive, arc. We don't see that because it may not have the right engine. It may not be fully powered sufficiently. It's not fully tested. And Russia doesn't want to go out and make a fool out of itself. So I think they're going to wait, perfect the system. They're deploying it if it's needed, if necessary. And I think they're doing that with the T-14. The T-90, on the other hand, is a proven system, and I think it's going to be going into battle soon. But the battles that are being fought aren't necessarily conducive to the T-90. Why do you want to take a T-90 and put it in an urban environment? Because a lot of the fighting that's going on, and especially in the Donetsk area, is built-up areas. Tanks don't do well in built-up areas. So why do you take your best asset when you have a very good tank, the Russians have, in the T-80 and in the T-72, and there's a bunch of numbers and letters that go after it because it's been modified several times, but that's a very good tank. So why not let that tank fight that tough battle and hold the T-90 for the deep mobility strikes and the fact that the T-90 started to show up on the battlefield might be an indicator that Russia's thinking about a new kind of war, where the T-90 will be used to maximum effect, because it's a very expensive weapon. You don't want to put it in a situation where it's going to pop off without, having, the reason why the Russians have all this cool stuff on it is so the tank can go out there and survive in a mobile conflict, immediate engagement with a NATO-style force. If they didn't build all this stuff so it can go into an urban environment and have a landmine and an RPG take it out.
All right, so that's it for the questions submitted in advance. Are you up for fielding a few questions from our audience watching on YouTube and Facebook?
I'm always up for fielding a few questions from the audience on YouTube and Facebook.
All right, and Tori, you can look for some good ones. Maybe this is such a question. There's a question. Bella.
Yeah,
Bella, thanks for the contribution there, Bella. Scott, as an intelligence officer, what do you think about recent deaths of Russian energy execs? Ivan Pechorin died in mysterious circumstances after, quote, falling overboard from a boat last Saturday. I believe he was number 8 over the past few months. That's an intriguing question.
No, and I'm fine. Look, I have some friends who are very pro-Ukrainian, and we're friends. That proves that you can disagree on tough issues and still maintain a friendship. But they continually send me this very story. Every time a Russian executive falls out of a window or whatever, they're like, "Hey, what's going on? Here's your great democracy. Here's your wonderful rule of law nation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." The short answer is I have no clue what's going on. I don't. I will be the first one to say that is weird. I mean, that's beyond coincidence. So something's going on, but I don't know what's going on. And I'm not going to be the guy that sits here and says, blame it on Putin or blame it on this, because I don't know. But do I agree it's suspicious? Hell yeah. Do I think it would make a great movie? Maybe. And I don't mean to, that's a horrible thing to say because people are dying, but it's more than a coincidence that you have 8 very senior Russian energy executives die under mysterious circumstances at a time when Russian energy has taken the forefront in the geopolitical game that Russia's playing with the rest of the world. It might imply that there might be some pushback or resistance from within the energy executives, and that Russia still has people that push people out of windows. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it implies that. Maybe there's another solution. Occam Razor actually says find the least complicated solution. Explanation. That's probably it. I'll leave that up to other people. Good question. I don't have the answer because I don't know. I can speculate like everybody. I'll be the first one to concede that it is very suspicious.
Okay, and now our friend Mehdi is back, and I'll ask the question out loud. And as I occasionally remind folks, the reason I read every question out loud is because we are on Spotify, and some folks choose to consume this content in audio only. So they need to know what the question is so they understand the answer. Scott, I am an old Cold War U.S. Army Cav M60A3 tank commander. And do you think old dogs like us who trained to fight the Soviets in Europe are the ones who get it because we trained to fight it?
Well, first of all, Mehdi, unless you were in an M60A2, you're not an old dog. No, I'm joking. It's a different modification of the tank. M60A3 is a great tank. When I was in the Marine Corps, the 3rd Tank Battalion 29 Palms still used the M60A3. And when we deployed to Desert Storm, they brought the M60A3 to Desert Storm, and a Marine Corps unit equipped with M60A3s was the most lethal tank killing unit, outperforming the M1A1 in Desert Storm. So the M60A3 is a wonderful, wonderful tank. And the fact that you were an operator of that vehicle, hats off to you. Yeah, look, I've said all along that one of the things that makes it easier for me to understand what's going on in this, and I wrote tweets about this back when I was allowed on Twitter, and I was somewhat dismissive of a group of people I call the vet bros. These are all the veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq who form a community they called Mill Twitter on Twitter, and they all sat there and they talked about military stuff. And a lot of the guys that rose to the top, of course, were the Rangers, the Special Forces, the Green Berets, the SEALs, because everybody went, ooh, Ranger, ooh, Green Beret, ooh, SEAL. They must know what they're talking about. And so suddenly you have a Special Forces guy whose specialty is a 12-man team talking about big arrow stuff. He's talking about maneuver warfare. He doesn't know what maneuver warfare is. He spent his entire career fighting low-intensity conflict in Afghanistan or Iraq. He knows nothing about large-scale ground warfare, combined arms warfare. You know who does know an awful lot about it? People like Mehdi, people like me, who actually trained to do this. This was our bread and butter. And we know what it means to put a division online. When was the last time this vet bro organization put a division online? You ain't never done it, guys. We've done it. We've put cores online. You haven't. So we understand the big picture. We know what the logistical sustainability issues. We know about, probability of kill with massed artillery fires. I wrote a tweet once that said, unless you have done a schedule of fires for, 2 or more artillery battalions, don't talk to me about what's going on in Ukraine, because it's an artillery-driven war, and you need to know about massed fires. If you haven't done it, you don't have a right to talk about it. Well, Mehdi's done mass tank operations. Mehdi knows how to coordinate artillery fire with tank maneuver. Mehdi knows how to coordinate helicopter support with tank maneuver. Mehdi knows how to bring in close air support with tank maneuver. None of the vet bros know how to do that. So one of the reasons why we get it right, Mehdi, is because we actually lived it. We didn't fight it, thank God, because we probably wouldn't be here today if we had to fight the kind of wars we trained for, because they're extraordinarily lethal, and there were a lot more Russians than there were us. But we trained to fight it, we know it, we understand it, and when we take a look at what's happening in Ukraine, it makes sense to us. Because we go, I recognize that. As opposed to me sitting back looking at stuff we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm going, why are you doing that? A low-intensity conflict, man. I'm not a low-intensity conflict guy. I'm a big arrow guy. The war in Ukraine is something I understand, something Mehdi understands. It's something the old dogs understand.
Okay, this next one isn't a question, but since Steve has given us so much love, let's give him some love back. One of my favorite members of the audience, Steve says these last 2 days he's been a total Ritter fanboy. Well, you have good taste, Steve. I've seen him on several channels, Steve says, but I still like him most here on U.S. Tour of Duty with Jeff and Tori. And if Scott doesn't calm down, I will never have time to finish reading his book. That's not a bad problem.
Finish the book. Trust me. What's happening today will still be happening tomorrow. Read the book. It's enlightening. It's written very cleverly. The author is a humorous guy. He has engaging writing style. Trust me, I know the author, so you should read the book. There
All
it
right.
is, the cover. Thank you.
And a great title, too. Modern Archive. Is President Zelensky still Mr. Komolowski's tool? If so, should the people worry about Z's vision? Ukraine is greater Israel? What? Secret phase? Is Z letting men perish so no one can stop phase 2?
I don't know. I mean, the gentleman he mentioned, Kolomoisky, is a Ukrainian oligarch who ran a media empire, and that media empire is what brought Zelensky into prominence. Zelensky was a comedian. He got on some shows. He was popular, and so they gave him his own show. Servant of the People was the name of the program. I've watched it. It is hilarious. Zelensky is a talented actor, really. And the show was engaging. I laughed, and then I stopped watching it because I unfortunately learned to hate Zelensky. But when I see him on that show, he's a talented actor, and it's a very clever show. And the interesting thing is, it introduced him to the, there was a time, there was a show in America called West Wing. And the guy that played president was Martin Sheen. I know Martin Sheen as the alcoholic confused kung fu master in Apocalypse Now. But most Americans know Martin Sheen as the president. And there was talk at one point in time of Martin Sheen running for president. Now think about just the lunacy of that statement. Martin Sheen, who is, I have the highest respect for the guy, but he's not presidential material because nothing about his resume has prepared him to be the chief executive of the United States. But it doesn't matter because the American people, when they see Martin Sheen, see the president of the United States. And they automatically say, he can do the job because I saw him on TV doing the job. Well, Kolomoisky went, whoa, Zelensky is the star of a very popular show at a time. It's a show that targets corruption. I mean, it's very upfront about the power of the oligarchs and how they're running everything from behind the scenes and how they're destroying the integrity of Ukraine and the difficulty it is of being a president with integrity, trying to work his way through that system. And most Ukrainians like that show because when they looked around, they saw a very corrupt country where oligarchs run everything and the government is too busy putting money in their own pockets and not helping the people. And they see Zelensky on TV doing this good stuff. They're like, oh, I'll vote for him for president. So Kolomoisky got Zelensky to run for president. Zelensky won the election, 78% of the vote, something around there like that. So Zelensky is indebted. But then one of the things that Zelensky did after he became president is start to take on the oligarchs, start to reduce the power of the oligarchs. And there was a divorce between him and, well, at least it's rumored that there's a divorce. There's talk about they've revoked his passport. They're talking about revoking his, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on. But Kolomoisky is also a Jewish Ukrainian with close ties to Israel. So there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about, and I don't want to get into it because once you start going down that rabbit hole, even if you can line up the facts, and I'm not accusing anything of that guy said being factually incorrect. The problem is I'm not prepared for that conversation with the depth of knowledge I need to be to ensure that everything I say is correct. I run the risk of heading down a path that people can say, I'm going into to conspiracy about how the Jews control the world and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into that. So I'm going to leave my answer the way it was, which is I think that Zelensky wouldn't be where he is today without Kolomoisky, but it appears that there's some sort of divorce taking place between the two, and I don't think their relationship is close enough to justify the kind of conspiracy that we're seeing there.
Okay, we've just passed the 2-hour mark, and you said you're tired, so I want to give you the opportunity now to say how many more questions you would like to take.
3 more questions.
All right. How did relations between Chechnya and Russia improve so much that they would now be allies?
Well, the best person to ask that would be a Chechen. And I'm not being dismissive because it would be a fascinating answer. You have to dig into what actually the first Chechen War was about. The first Chechen War was about greed, plain and simple. You had certain clans in Chechnya. Chechnya is an oil-producing country, or republic. they have oil fields and they have pipelines, and the pipelines transmit the oil into Russia. Who controls the pipelines? You get a lot of money. Anybody who researches the economy of pipelines, ask yourself this: Ukraine doesn't produce any oil. Why does Ukraine receive $5 billion of oil revenue every year? Because Russia has to pay them $5 billion to transit oil and gas through pipelines that cross over Ukrainian soil. And so these guys, when the Soviet Union collapsed, everybody was running around trying to divvy up state power and state resources. And the oligarchs were the guys that went in and took over state enterprises. And then what they did is, because everybody said, well, you can't have that, it belongs to the people. Then they created shares, the system of shares, and they gave everybody the shares. They said, okay, people, come in, here's your shares. And then they squeezed the economy, and the people needed money. And the oligarch said, I'll buy your share, but I'm not going to pay you full price. I'm going to pay you, 20 kopecks to the ruble. I'm going to pay you 2 kopecks to the ruble. The people are so desperate that they sold all their shares back to the oligarchs, who quickly took control of the factory. And meanwhile, the people are starving still. That's why a lot of the Russians, when they think about the 1990s, are absolutely furious about it. They hate it. They hated what happened to them. They hated the people who caused it. The oligarchs caused it. The West caused it. A lot of people caused it. Chechnya was not immune to this. There were certain clans that said, hey, we're going to tap into this money-making thing. We're going to take control of the pipeline so that we get the income. We're going to charge the oil company money to transit the pipeline, and we'll receive that money, or we'll take control of the oil field. And so they were making it, and the Russians said, you can't do this. They launched a coup. They removed some power. They put a guy in. The Russians said, no, we're going to come in. So I think January, February of 1992, 93, 94, I don't have the exact date. The Russians sent a motorized division in the Grozny, and the leading regiment got caught out and slaughtered. It's one of the greatest defeats that Russia suffered in modern history in terms of casualties. I mean, these guys got slaughtered. The guy I interviewed, by the way, my second interview on the Scott Ritter show, was a company commander of the of one of the units that got caught up in the Battle of Grozny. He was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union for that, Hero of Russia, I'm sorry, for that for that fight, desperate fight. But so the Russians now got involved in this fight, which turned out to be more or less a Chechen civil war. It was basically a clan of Chechens who were trying to seize things from themselves. When Russia first fought the first phase of the Chechen War, they viewed every Chechen as the enemy. That was one of the problems, because the way the Russians behaved, the way the Russians acted, is they turned a lot of Chechens against them. And so people were signing up with the Chechen resistance, not because they believed in the resistance or clan loyalty, but because they were against the way the Russians were prosecuting the war. When the first Chechen War ended, it was still a nation that was that there were still significant problems. The other thing is, this conflict took place at a time when CIA was actively working to disrupt Russia, take control of Russia, et cetera. And some people believed that it was a good idea that Russia not have total control of the energy, of the money-producing aspects of energy. That may be a good idea, that these pipelines are controlled by the Chechens, et cetera. And so the CIA got involved. We started shipping money and shipping arms to the Chechen rebels to encourage them to rise up and fight against the Russians. And it's not just me. I mean, Putin gave a very interesting answer the other day when he was asked about, did he want to join NATO? He said, look, I'll be honest with you. I went to Bill Clinton and I said, hey, could we join NATO? And Clinton said no. And then Clinton turned around and started doing what they did in Chechnya, meaning the Russians know exactly what the CIA was doing in Chechnya. There was a second Chechen war that was fought after when Putin became I think the prime minister initially, and then the president, started in like 1999, around that time period. And Putin became heavily involved in this. And this one lasted until the mid, like 2004, 2005 time period. But in this part, the Russians did it differently. The Russians were able to divide Chechen society and isolate the clans that were corrupt and were favoring this, and to win over the clans that recognize that the path to Chechenya's salvation isn't through independence, but rather through autonomy within the framework of the Russian Federation. and the Russians formed a very close alliance. The reason why the Russians won that war isn't because the Russian army beat them, it's because the Russians got the Chechens to fight with them. And the Chechens fighting with the Russians were able to defeat the Chechens who were fighting against the Russians. And they won. And what happened there is you ended up empowering a bunch of Chechen leaders who were combat leaders, hardened dudes. And so the Chechen identity, the modern Chechen identity is very much, and it's always been a warrior society, but this is a real warrior society. These are guys who really actually fought a very brutal war and won. And so that became very much part of their national identity, and it was linked to Russia. The Chechen government today is thankful for Russia for what happened to create this new nation. And if you travel through Chechnya today, look at the development. It's a modern state. They've got the oil income, and they're able to build a lot of nice things. Grozny was a city that had been devastated, bombed to the ground. It looked like Stalingrad, totally blown up. Today, Grozny is a modern city, wide avenues, modern buildings, everything you could want. Chechnya is like that. You go to the villages, they have good roads going to the villages. They have nice buildings in the villages. They have all the amenities that they could want because of the benefits of working with Russia, not against Russia. And so the Chechens take a look at what's happening in Ukraine, and they say, we recognize this. We see this. We see a poison element of society trying to take over and put society against society. So that's why the Chechens, they look at the Azov people, they look at the right sector, they look at the Nazis, they say, we know who you are. You're what we used to be. You're those guys that caused the destruction of Chechnya. We're not going to let you do this. And that's why the Chechens are taking a leading role in this. Plus, they're just good fighters. But the relationship between the Chechen Republic and the Russian Federation today is as tight as it's ever been. And it's because of the Second Chechen War, where the Russians were able to make common cause with the majority of the Chechen people who recognized that their future was best if they took a path with Russia as opposed to taking the path against Russia. Now, I want to throw in something here because I know we said 3 questions, but Georgia, a guy put up Georgia down there. He asked about what's going on. Georgia needs to be careful right now because there's a big national movement right now, nationalist movement. A lot of national parties that are putting pressure on the Georgian government to open up a second front against Russia, to somehow become a combatant in this fight. Georgia would do well to reflect on the lessons of Chechen conflict. And let me tell you what the lesson is. If you work against Russia, you will be destroyed. In Georgia, you don't stand a chance against Russia. If you think 2008 was bad, wait until 2022 or 2023 when you try and pull a trick like that. Georgia right now is a nation that's gutted. They lost control of 2 territories, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. This is Georgia. This is Georgia. And they lost it. And it seems to me that Georgia's #1 priority should be getting Abkhazia and Ossetia back under sovereign Georgian control, which means if you want this to happen, you're going to have to find a way to not only cooperate with Russia, but be Russia's friends. Again, Chechnya. What happened when the Chechens became Russia's friends as opposed to their enemy? Look at Chechnya today, a thriving state. People are doing very well, and they have independent national identity. I mean, they are Chechens. There's no one saying that the Chechens went away. Where did the Chechens go? They're right there in your face with their beards, their Akhmat Sila. I mean, the Chechens haven't gone away. They're more prominent today being a part of the Russian Federation than they were when they were trying to be independent. So this would be a horrible mistake. And the Georgians have to understand this too. And it's probably gonna get some of these nationalists upset. Follow the money. And if you follow the money of these nationalist parties, you will find the United States government and the CIA actively encouraging the Georgians to rise up and open up the second front. And if you're a Georgian, you have to ask yourself the following question. Is what the United States is asking us to do going to help us get Abkhazia back? Now, some idiot will say, yes, because we're going to raise an army and we're going to go in and reoccupy Abkhazia. No, you're not. The Russians will defeat you. You have no chance. Russia will pull back and annihilate your country. I haven't been to Georgia in a long time, but my wife goes back frequently. and my daughter was there in the Peace Corps. It's a modern state. It's doing very well. It's I mean, life is good in Georgia. Why would the Georgians want to throw this away? Because life will not be good if you want to open up a second front. A second front means all of Georgia becomes a second front. And this time when the Russians finish, not only are you going to permanently use Abkhazia, permanently use South Ossetia, you may lose other territories as well. Ajaria may not be part of Georgia anymore. The Russians may separate Mingralia because there's a lot of Mingrelians that aren't happy about being part of Georgia. The Russians may just fracture, make Georgia disappear. If that's what the Georgians want, if they want to disappear as a nation state, open up a second front. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. If you're a Georgian patriot, you should be encouraging the return to sovereign control of Abkhazia and Ossetia through peaceful negotiated means, which means you're going to have to learn to be friends with the one country that can make that happen, and that's Russia. And you're going to have to learn to start saying no to the one nation that isn't going to help you doing that, and that's the United States. And you need to recognize that NATO membership is a poison pill. If you swallow the pill of NATO membership, Georgia will cease to exist as a modern nation state. I'm answering the gentleman who asked the question down below.
All right. Well, also, you said at the outset that you wanted to say something about Georgia anyway, so you didn't need me to remind you. Falarin Yusuf is watching on YouTube. His question, or her question, Australia is planning to buy Collin-class subs through the AUKUS deal. Will it help their capabilities against the Chinese in a war situation?
I'd have to research the Collins-class sub. Is that my understanding is that here's my understanding is that the Australians had a certain class of submarine, which was a diesel submarine. It apparently was a nuclear submarine that had been redone, or maybe it was diesel. It was diesel all along, but it was an old submarine. It needed to be replaced, and they had cut a deal with the French to take a French nuclear submarine, but remove the nuclear power plant, put in diesel power plant, and do that. And it was complicated. It was going to cost a lot of money. It might not have been very effective. The submarine that they're getting rid of actually has a very good reputation for running silent, running deep. And what I mean by that is it's legendary in some of the intelligence things that it's done. It apparently has snuck its way into Chinese ports, Vietnamese ports, right? I don't know about Russian ports, but it's very quiet. They've taken some interesting photographs of intelligence value. They've tailed in the big exercises where the United States is supposed to protect the aircraft carrier, and we got our own submarines and ships out there. These diesel submarines were able to penetrate, get up, and get a kill shot at the carrier. Tells you something. But apparently these were just expensive to maintain, and they weren't able to get them all out at a time because of manpower constraints. So they wanted to buy a new submarine. French submarine went south. The whole AUKUS thing is premised on the United Kingdom and the United States providing Australia with a nuclear submarine. I have to go look up at Collins class and see if that's what I thought it was going to be, a Los Angeles class sub. But here's the controversy. Anytime you start dealing with nuclear stuff, it becomes a safeguards issue under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so the United States and Great Britain are trying to cheat the NPT by transferring nuclear technology in a uncontrolled manner to Australia. It's undermining the NPT. Australia's always been a big defender of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So that's a problem too. But the question was about what's it going to do with China? First of all, Russia, any Australian submarine force, I mean, the purpose of the Australian submarine force is supposed to protect the sea lines of communication because Australia is an island nation. So it survives by being able to bring in trade goods. So the submarines are supposed to help keep the lines of communication open. And I think a submarine force that had that as its primary mission, these submarines would be capable of helping facilitate that. But that's not what the United States wants. The whole purpose of this AUKUS arrangement is that Australia will be given certain submarines which will fall under basically the operational concept of the United States so that they forward deploy away from Australia to China to help implement a blockade of China to help clear sea lanes in support of a Taiwan operation. And I'll just tell you right now that no, this won't help. China will sink all your subs. That's just a statement of fact. And your subs aren't going to protect you. Actually, by going down that route, you're doing Australia harm. This is one of the worst arrangements ever, and every Australian knows it. I mean, it's a political decision, to become tighter with the United States and the United Kingdom, to put a thumb in the eye of France. But from a national security standpoint, this whole submarine deal stinks. Now, I'm going to have to go look up the Collins-class submarine. Maybe there's something new going on here that I don't know about. Is that a new submarine, or is that the renamed Los Angeles-class submarine, but it's going to be called Collins-class when it becomes an Australian sub? I have to find out.
Okay. We just broke the 3,000 live viewer mark. That's very good. And we've also come to the last question. Tori, we have one more for our favorite weapons inspector. Steve-O is back. Oh, you're going to be in trouble with your wife. I don't know what this when he comes out to an American currency, but it must add up to be something. And all right, but your secret is safe with us, Steve-O. Does Scott like death metal? If so, I'd be sending him my band's LP or CD together with his book to get his autograph.
I don't, I'll be honest, but I know someone who does. So if you sent me that CD, I would get it in the hands of somebody who definitely likes that kind of music, and they would definitely appreciate it. So if you send me the book, I guess if Steve has a way to contact you, Jeff, or me through email, I don't know how. I'm not going to give it out right now, but if I don't know if you're in contact with Steve through other means or whatever. But,
okay, well, Steve-O, if you don't have any other way to do it, just send me an email through the website, and I'll make sure.
And what I'll say to Steve is, Steve-O. I'm sorry, Steve-O. You send me the book, I'll autograph it. I'll send it back to you. So Jeff will find a way to get you my address. Just mail me the book along with a return address. I'll autograph it, mail it back to you, and I'll take whatever CDs that you send in there, and I'll give them to somebody who I know who will appreciate it.
All right, good deal. So, Scott, is this the end of your work week? Do you now get to rest finally?
Yes, I do. Marina has put a hard stop on me doing interviews over the weekend. Sometimes I have to write over the weekend. I definitely have to write over the weekend. But in terms of the interviews, unless there's a breaking story, this is it. We're done for the week, and I won't re-engage until probably Sunday night.
All right, great. Well, you deserve some rest. So as we said before, we're looking for volunteers, all kinds. Maybe you're a graphic artist or you're a video editor. But in particular, we're looking for translators. If you're bilingual, if you know Russian and English, you can help us put together Russian versions of our videos. So also please get a hold of us through the website. And don't worry about it if you don't have all the talent that it takes. We'll put you together with those who have the necessary elements to help make it happen. So some people know how to translate, other people can do voiceovers, etc., etc. Thanks so much to Tori Mansfield for producing, doing a great job as always. Thank you, Scott.